beginning of the pandemic in March, I was like, you know what? Every week I'm going to pick a room and I'm going to fix it. And like, I'm going to have the most organized house ever because I have all this time. I don't have to do pickup and drop offs. Like, we're all just stuck here. And oh my God, my house has never been more disorganized.
If there's time to spare, there's
Yeah.
no extra energy or
None.
mental capacity to spare at those sort of things.
There's less because
Yeah.
on top of like normal everyday crap that everybody has to deal with, you have like anxiety about the unknown future. You have financial stress because a lot of people's jobs are obsolete right now or their incomes have been cut.
The amount of energy it takes just to process stress.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about when you're going through all of those things at once, like it is normal for your energy and your motivation and your ability to think clearly. It's normal for all of that to slow down. It's like
Right.
you do have like an emotional metabolism. And just like your physical metabolism will slow down in times of starvation to try and hold on to everything, your emotional metabolism will slow down in times of intense stress because your nervous system can only take so much.
Since we're talking about mental health, I want to talk a little bit about I've seen you say this a lot, and I've also know that you talk about it in your book, but you use a term a lot, um, morally neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Will you define that?
Everyone sort of felt like they were failing at was the housework in their home, the laundry, the dish, the things that just tended to pile up and become difficult to manage, or the things that maybe if you are managing them well, you're only doing so with such high anxiety that you're exhausted all the time. And so the term morally neutral basically means it refers to a task or an object or a process where the way that you do that thing or whether or not you do that thing has no moral value. It doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. It doesn't make you a success or a failure. But a lot of us take that idea of being a good person, bad person, success, or failure into things that are not morally charged. So we see our inability to keep on top of our laundry and think, God, I'm such a bad mom.
Ah,
I am
totally.
failing. Why can't I keep up with this? Why can't I get on top of this? Why can't I just, and then we get really frustrated that, I clean and then they mess it up and I have to clean again because we have it in our minds that being clean and neat and tidy to some magic external standard is what makes you good and a successful parent or a successful partner or a valid adult. And so if you struggle to do that, to meet that external standard, we begin to think that we are not good enough as people.
So understanding that alone is freeing of your mom guilt.
Even when you know it's morally neutral, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stop being stressful or that all your problems are solved. I mean, you still may not have the support that you need or be going through a hard season.
Right. You could
But
be a
it
single
does mean
parent.
exactly, but it does mean that it has nothing to do with me failing or
No.
being bad.
My house by no means is spotless, by no means. However, there are certain specific areas of my house that I need to be clean because if I walk through my living room, for example, and there's stuff everywhere, I can feel my anxiety and like my stress level go up, and I feel like I cannot function and get my work done because it's distracting to me, right? But my kids' room is trashed half the time, and I shut the door.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I don't have to stare at it all day while I'm working.
Clean is not a black and white
No,
thing.
no.
And nowhere you are not morally obligated to make all of your care cycles line up at the done point at the same time.
What is your thoughts on children and chores?
So I have a few guidelines that we use in sort of our approach with our children. And the first one is we don't use bribes or punishments. So we don't use bribes in, okay, if you clean your room, you get an ice cream, or if you do this, or you get a gold star. But the reward is the functionality of your space, and the obligation is being a part of our family.
Yeah.
And so we try to avoid bribes. We're careful not to cast housework as like always such a bummer, because if I walk around and I'm always complaining about having to do housework, and I always approach it as, oh, do this, oh, this met, like I'm casting that in the light of, this is so boring to do, this is so awful to do, this is such a awful experience. And it's like, of course they're gonna want to avoid those things.
Fair.
And
That's
so
fair.
trying to model doing that, and then avoiding, we don't use cleaning as punishment. You misbehave and the punishment is you have to scrub the floor or whatever.
Like extra chore,
um
like you did something wrong, you're gonna
yeah, like
extra
extra chores.
for that. And that makes sense because then again, you're making it such a negative thing.
Yeah. And so I also, because my kids are really small, I do care tasks in front of them. And so I always joke that there is no care task fairy in our home. I try to do care tasks in front of my children. I try to involve them as much as possible. Everyone knows how much longer something can take if you let a toddler participate. And so
I hate it.
by no means am I saying that like it has to be done that way or it's better to do it that way. But I think there is some benefit in doing it that way. So I do some things after they go to bed, or, I'll let them watch a TV so I can get something done. Obviously, I do that. But what I'm trying to avoid is them having their whole childhood where they go to bed with everything messy and they wake up with everything in its place, like some fairy came in and put everything back for them to enjoy, right? I want
No.
to involve them, but even if they're not doing it, they're seeing that this is a part of life.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
Someone has to do this.
And you will
And
too.
yeah, and
I mean,
that's
like,
how we enjoy this home.
I struggle with if chores should have an allowance or not, because
Mm,
I do want to teach my kids how to earn money, save money, and that everybody should contribute in the ways that they can to the best needs for our family, right? That is part of doing chores that you're capable of doing at whatever age.
Personally, I believe that each person should have a universal income. So it actually lines up with, hey, you know what, you're a part of this family, and we're all working together to make the family work, and we're all going to have our share of money that we have autonomy over depending on our age, right? And so I don't plan on marrying them together as a one-to-one work for this, get this system. However, I also worked, as I mentioned, with families of people that were struggling with addiction, and it was always around the area of boundaries. And one of the things that we talk about is, if you continue that, if you want the benefits of a family, you have to take on the responsibilities and the obligations of a family.
Okay.
And so, if I had a child that was continuously not meeting their responsibilities as a family member, I might at some point, it might get to a point where I set them down and say, hey, here's the deal. You are not engaging in your responsibilities as a family, as part of our family. We've had multiple conversations, right? So saying we've had multiple conversations about why it's important and this and that. So at this point, Dad and I are not going to continue to give you your allowance. We're not punishing you for doing that. We're not trying to incentivize you to do it. We're not doing it to try and change your behavior. But we have a limit for how long we will allow you to enjoy certain benefits in this family if you make it clear to us you have no interest in engaging in the obligations of family. And that's the real world.
Yeah.
And it's different, right, than let's take his money away so that he goes and cleans his room.
Right.
Because you know what? Like if you marry the allowance to the task, you might have a kid that goes, that's fine, I don't need money.
Yeah.
And then where will you be?
That's
now I have no way to make him clean his room.
Yeah. So that's my 7-year-old. He's incredibly strong-willed. So it's like if he is playing Roblox and he wants points, he'll come to me and say, what can I do to earn $3? Right? because he wants
Yeah.
these $3 to do something. But if I said, you need to clean your room or you're not getting your allowance, he'll be like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? It has
And
to
I
be on
want to,
his
I,
terms. He's like, "Ugh," he's a
yes.
tough cookie, that boy.
And having I mean, I don't want my children to be entitled.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want them to have so much privilege that they have those blind spots and think they're owed things. But the way that I want to approach that is that I have limits for how I will behave, how I will give, how I will, right? I actually saw someone on TikTok say this, and I wish I could remember her handle because it was brilliant. She talked about how she doesn't use punishments or bribes, and she has teenagers. And she said, so, every Friday, my kids are supposed to bring their sheets and their laundry down to get washed. Or maybe they're grade school, I don't know, but they were not tiny kids. She said, and so if one of them doesn't do that, and then they come to me the next day and say, hey, can you give me a ride to the mall? My answer is, sure, but bring down your laundry first because you didn't do that yet. And so, and I love the way she phrased it because she didn't say, no, you can't go because you didn't bring your laundry down. She just simply said, hey, I'm unwilling to take you to the mall if you're not willing to bring your stuff down. And so she didn't approach it from a manipulative, how can I make you do this? She didn't approach it from a punishment standpoint because you messed it up. But she did approach it from a boundaried standpoint of this is what our family does and this is what everyone is expected to do. And as soon as you do it, I will take you to the mall. And I felt like that really summed up the approach that I was going for.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And, in a way, it's like they're still getting an allowance for their chores or they're still there, but there's separate consequences and there's separate expectations. And I know that you spoke a little bit about women in society and how women versus men, that these things bother us more, right? Than they typically do. And that's not in a sexist way. I understand that. But bringing society into the picture here, what is your take on that with the way women hold on to this versus the way men hold on to these morally mutual tasks?
So I definitely think it is a product of a patriarchal society. And I think that a patriarchal society and the way that we've experienced it in this country is damaging to men and to women. There's a unique set of pressures and stresses on men as a result of the script that a patriarchal culture has given them. But part of the unique script that has been given to women is this idea that your worth is, at worst equal to, but at best affected by how well you keep house.
Yeah.
And you see this in people telling anecdotal stories, right? There's guests coming over and the woman is freaking out about the way things look and the man is going, or you hear stories about a mother-in-law getting on to a daughter-in-law about the state of their home, right? And the
Yeah.
daughter-in-law going, why aren't you talking to your own child who also lives here about this? But the spotlight is just automatically shown on the woman
Yeah.
that regardless of whether she's working or not, it's her job or her fault, right? If it's not clean, if it's not organized, if it's not tidy. And the reality is that there's a lot of functioning on a pretty wide spectrum between messy and tidy.
Yeah.
And there's just sort of a unique pressure, and a lot of people experience this even growing up. A lot of women will talk about how they were expected to do care tasks that their brothers were not expected to do,
Oh,
or they
really?
were punished for care tasks at a standard that their brothers were not, or sometimes they were taught things. You see this sometimes in the reverse where young men will say, nobody ever taught me to cook, no one ever taught me to do my laundry, because that just wasn't, you know what I mean? Like they did their daughters, like, oh, let's bake together, let's do laundry together. And so we do sort
Mhm.
of put that on women, sort of left over from when our job was to just stay at home and make house and make babies.
You just made me so aware of how I want to be careful to not do that with my son versus my daughters. Now, I have one sister. That's it. and she's 5 years older than me. So I did not grow up in an environment like that. My parents are also divorced since I was in kindergarten.
Mhm.
So my mother was going to college full time, working full time, and keeping house. Right. And at my dad's, I feel like I did more chores. So that's interesting.
Yep.
And I never, but what you're saying actually makes me feel like the poor, I don't mean this, don't take us the wrong way, but the poor men that we get pissed at because that, like we're cleaning for a party, for example. And the guy's like, I mean, it's what's the big deal? Who cares if the floors are clean? They're gonna walk all over them anyway. And and you're like, can't damn it, just can't you help me? Like, what is the problem here? Because we are thinking like we think, right? So
Mhm.
we're thinking he doesn't care. He doesn't want to help me. And he thinks it's my job to do these things. And he's not contributing. But the reality is he's not thinking any of that. He's just thinking it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And
And
so
sometimes I think like when we talk about like, oh, like a husband or a partner will say like, well, I just don't see it. When we get mad about like, why didn't you pick that up? Well, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. And I feel like we've talked about that so much that we've assumed it's like a gender thing. Like there's something inherently female about seeing it and inherently male about not seeing it. And I don't believe that at all. My first question is, I mean, maybe he would see it if his parents had flippin' yelled at him about it his whole childhood,
right.
because probably little girls have their attention drawn to that sort of thing over and over and over far more often than little boys do.
Yeah. And
And
that's
that's not
not
a
to
rule,
say,
obviously. But
yeah.
if you know what I mean, like if parents are getting on to little girls about, well, there's stuff everywhere, you got to pick this up, you got to see this, you got like, then yeah, you're going to grow up and see stuff that somebody who didn't experience that wouldn't, at just in the way that we parent little boys and little girls differently. So who knows if that's something that actually we've done.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I want to say, just for listeners' perspective, that like we're not saying all men, all women, because obviously there are parents out there that raise their sons. Like, my husband knows how to sew and he knows he irons. I don't. I refuse
That's
to touch
awesome.
an iron. My husband does ironing. My husband also is a gardener and my husband is a chef. So like there are like, and if I say I don't feel like doing laundry and there's 4 loads, he will do them on his day off. No problem. Like I am very blessed. There are, and thank you to his mother and father for raising him that way because I can't take credit for that. That's who he is. So we are not saying that, we're not trying to generalize, but majority of the time you have men raised in a way where they don't take on these tasks. Hopefully with
Yeah, and it's not
generation gaps,
about,
it'll get better.
yeah, hopefully. And it's not about individual character. We're just talking
No.
about the effect that a patriarchal system,
Yeah.
because a lot of times somebody will say, I've had young men on my comment sections that say, you know what, I'm a boy and I feel shame. You're saying that this is something unique to women, but I feel shame when my house isn't picked up. I feel shame.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that there are not men out there that weren't given those sort of messages, but typically they're not systematically
Yeah.
given those messages. Maybe there was a parent that gave them that, but there's not like an entire
Society wasn't.
patriarchal system coming
Yeah.
together to enforce that onto people.
Before we run out of time, I did want to talk about if you could give a summary a little bit about in your book, you talk about the 6 pillars
Yeah,
of struggle. Can you explain what that means a little bit?
sure. So struggle care is sort of the brand name that I use to describe this approach of moral neutrality for people that struggle. And there are 6 pillars that most of my content kind of comes from. And the first one is that care tasks are morally neutral. The second one is that rest is a right and not a reward. And so, rest, fun, connection, they're not things that you get as a reward for completing all of your care tasks. They are real legitimate needs and you are allowed to meet them even if things aren't done. The third one is that you deserve kindness regardless of your level of functioning. And so even if your space is not functioning and you're not functioning, whether that's from a health issue or a mental health issue or just a season of life, that's no reason for you to be berating yourself or bullying yourself or to let anybody else do it. And then we have one sort of, a lot of people have a lot of environmental concerns when they're in a very dark place that hinders them from caring for themselves. And so I have this sort of funny quote that says, you can't save the rainforest if you're depressed, which is like, you have to prioritize the good you can do for the world. And so if eating off of paper plates for a few months so that you can heal, or so that you can get help with your mental health, or so that you can care for your family, you should do that. If doing that allows you to become a better functioning person who might actually do more good for the world in the future, that is a trade-off you should do. Or, you know, somebody messaged me and said, hey, I like your stuff for dishes, but like my dishes have literally been piled up for months, like months. Like I can't even walk in my kitchen. What do I do? And I was like, throw them away.
I was
Like
thinking the
throw
same. I'm
all of
like,
your
I
dishes
would
away.
not. Yeah, I'd
Right?
throw them away.
And people are like, oh, but you know, it's so wasteful. And it's like, well, they're being wasted, not being used. Like they're not less wasteful in the trash if they're just sitting there not being used, right?
Throw them in
And
a
so,
recycling bin if they're glass. Like, it's fine.
right. Like, so, you know, care for yourself first so that you can get to if you're not at a functioning level. So that's one of them. Shame is the enemy of functioning is another one that I talk about. You know, if you're not functioning, your space isn't functioning, feeling like you're a piece of junk and berating yourself is actually going to make you less likely to reach a functioning level. And so being kind to yourself, it's okay for you to be kind to yourself, even if you're not functioning well. You don't have to like atone for your dysfunction by being mean to yourself. And then we talk about good enough is perfect. And so that's this idea that, you know, you don't exist to serve your space. Your space exists to serve you. And you don't have to do everything Martha Stewart's way. You don't have to look like, it doesn't have to look like the front cover of a magazine. You don't have to do it quote unquote right. You just have to do it in a way that functions for you. That is just good enough. Like if it looks better than it did, you're golden.
Yeah.
If it functions better than it did, you're golden. So struggle care works for both ends of the spectrum. People whose space isn't functioning and people whose space is maybe functioning or even over functioning, but they're only maintaining it with a high level of anxiety and they're in a lot of distress.
Yeah.
And so I would say you're going to approach it from both ends. So on the one hand, we do want to find tangible systems that allow your space to function and for you to engage in parts of your care systems that maybe, you know, you don't want it to just function. There are parts of it that make you comfortable. There are parts of it that make you happy. And so we do want to find systems and work on practical ways for you to be able to achieve that, to bring the functioning up a little higher, right? But we want to come at the other end too, which is we really want to investigate, why am I so anxious about mess? Why can I not concentrate, you know, unless everything is in its place? Why am I going from task to task to task to task and only have 5 unfinished tasks? Because for a lot of people, they go, well, I mean, clutter just makes me anxious. And they don't think past that. And maybe there isn't anything past that for you, but for a lot of people, there is. For a lot of people, if they experienced any kind of trauma or a parental distress, if they were yelled at a lot for clutter, then their brain and their nervous system begins to see clutter as a warning sign for rejection and for being yelled at. And so now when they see clutter as an adult, they get this nervous system reaction. Oh, I gotta go put it up, right? Or they are anxious about the clutter because they know that if it gets to a certain point, they'll be too overwhelmed to deal with it. And they have this fear that, and then I'll drown and then it'll never end. And then right. And
that's
so,
where I go, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or unpacking, you know, I get anxious about it because I feel like I'm failing when it's not put back together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there are lots of things we do in our homes because it makes us happy. Right? It makes me happy to see the clear counter or this, that, and the other But I think people assume that if something being aesthetically pleasing brings you peace and calm, that the opposite of that has to be, so then if it's not in place, I'm anxious. And that's not true. My book has a few strategies, and so there is a practical side to it, but I'm not Marie Kondo. I'm not the home edit. I don't have like this
Right.
crystallized prescriptive. So step one, you're going to do this. Step two, you're going to do that. It's more about the mindset
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
your relationship to the care tasks. And then I also have ideas and strategies. And so it's not this cohesive system of, okay, now I'm going to do the fly lady system. It's just, hey, here's something. Let's throw this at the wall. Does it stick? Does it feel good? Does that resonate with you? Okay, what about this? What if you did it this way? Just sort of the strategies are more about helping us get outside of the box of what we think it has to look like,
Yeah.
so that if you have a right relationship with care tasks and you get outside that box, you can design the systems that work for you.
Casey Davis, I am so glad that you came on today and talked with me. And if you want to hear more about her, you can check out her TikTok. You can look her up on strugglecare.com. And that has a link to all of her social media accounts, to her book. She has more really good information on there. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much.